Welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. This week's guest has a brilliant way of describing his striking career change in 2008, when he went from birdless flight to flightless birds. Let me explain. For more than a decade, Ben Jackson had been the MD of the London Beach Store, a business he loved because it focused on his fascination for kite surfing, which had begun when he was just 3 years old. Then just over a decade ago, he got involved in running his family farm and has never looked back. Fluffetts specialises in what he calls genuinely free-range eggs, and Ben has built up encyclopaedic knowledge about every aspect of hen behaviour and egg laying. For instance, the pecking order really does exist, and most flocks have a hardcore escape committee. Birds who work out how to fly over any barrier and into the woods, never to return. And if you've ever wondered, and of course how can you not have, why egg yolks vary in colour from pale yellow to orange, or why the shells of larger eggs tend to be more brittle than those of smaller ones, then Ben has the answers, and some of them will make your mind boggle. I've wanted to dive deep into eggs for a long time. We consume millions of them a day across the country, but with battery farming, organic and free range, I think there's a great deal of confusion around such an everyday product. So it's time to get myth busting and get some actual facts, and I very much hope you enjoy this week's conversation. Ben Jackson from Fluffetts Farm, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast. Very much appreciated. Can you just explain to people listening, where on planet Earth are we, Ben?
We are there. Where are we? We're in the Avon Valley, just west of Ringwood, and we're west of the New Forest here, and just sitting in our kitchen.
In your kitchen, yeah, very nice. Thank you for getting us out, because unfortunately we were going to do this with the hens, I think, weren't we? But
yeah, we had a romantic vision of sitting in your Land Rover with the hens clucking about us, but unfortunately it's another stormy, wet afternoon.
It is. I've just driven through the monsoon to get here. It's shocking.
We've gone for the more comfortable options.
Yeah. But thank you for opening up your house to me. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you very much for taking the time. Yeah.
No, I'm excited. There's a couple of things that I keep banging on about, and that I've wanted to kind of get my head around. One was bees, because I just, you hear all this stuff about, lack of pollinating insects and what's going on, and they're so important in the food supply chain. And the other one is eggs, and I think it's because eggs is a bit confusing as a consumer, because you've got free range, you've got Red Tractor, you've got Happy Eggs, you've got Barn, and we all pretty much all eat them. I think you were saying before 40 million eggs a day or something.
Yeah, it's average of just over half an egg per head per day for the UK. I think.
So you are now my designated egg expert, and I am here to learn and all about how it works. And I know you've listened to some episodes, so I like to.
Oh yes, I'm a fan of Humans of Hospitality.
Thank you so much.
It's lovely.
So I'm going to start with a slightly cliched question, but it's going to lead into kind of normal flock sizes and stuff like that. But can you just explain a little bit about how many hens do you actually have, and how many eggs do you produce as Ben, the Fluffett Eggman?
Okay, well, when all four of our flocks are laying, we're producing about 1,000 dozen a day, and that's from 13,000 hens. And they're in there's 3 houses that hold 3,000, and then another house that holds 4,000 birds. And everyone always thinks that's a lot of chickens, but it's actually pretty small scale by today's standards. When you think back, when we started 20 years ago producing eggs, we had 2 houses of 8,000, so 16,000 birds. We're still smaller than we were 20 years ago. And, the typical sort of farm size for a supermarket contract these days is between 30 and 60,000, and that's free range hens.
Yeah.
Cage hens, you might have as many, well, literally hundreds of thousands of hens in a single building.
Yeah, you were saying so you can literally get one kind of warehouse, we call it, with 400,000 birds.
Yeah, and that's not the biggest unit.
That's just mind blowing, isn't it?
I think there's one actually that's on. I think it's for sale up in Wiltshire somewhere. I saw the other day, and I think that's got getting on for 1 million hens.
Wow, you tempted?
It's a pretty. The farm itself would probably be less acres than the 30 acres that we have our hens on. So
wow, okay. So you're very much free range. So although you've got up to 13,000, they're kept in how many's in each? Is it a flock?
Yeah, we call them a flock.
Right.
So there's 3 flocks which have 3,000 in the house. One's slightly bigger; it's about 3,300, and then the other house holds 4,000.
Okay. And then is this a fairly big kind of what do they get, the house you called it? So yeah, so they've got plenty of space in there. What is it that designates? Is there one level down from free? We've obviously got battery and you've got free range. Is there a level in between that as well? Or?
Well, the popular system in Holland, which we don't have so much of here, is the barn system, and it's the same stocking density, so 9 birds per square metre, and that changed in 2012 from 12 birds per square metre before.
Right.
So it's 9 birds per square metre. And the barn system would be the same as the free range on the inside, but with no access to the outdoors.
Right.
Though some barn producers do have a very small sort of outdoor veranda area for the hens to sort of just go outside in a limited way.
Yeah, so we're straight into one of the things that I suppose I hear is that when free range eggs are produced on a mass scale, that there's this technical kind of aspect that there might be access to the outdoors, as in at one end of the house there's a little door and they could go outside if they wanted, but in reality it's pretty unrealistic because it's either a small amount of space or there's not enough room outside or they're just not interested. Is that true?
Sure. I mean, with our type of system, we're able to spend a lot of time with the hens from the day they arrive on the farm, and we sort of, as we allow them to sort of feel their way into the outdoors, we're encouraging them to go outdoors, and we'll initially give them a limited access to the outdoor area, and they'll sort of find their feet, and when you sort of train them from day one to be relaxed, happy, sort of not just the hens, you find that if you can really sort of spend time with them, they learn the confidence to sort of go out and spend time outdoors. And I think that's very difficult when you've got just sort of one person looking after 16,000 or more hens, to actually sort of spend that time with the birds, to give them that sort of character that they want to go outdoors and spend time outdoors. But there is also there's an aspect to the fact that the big systems, the dominant birds tend to sort of guard the doors to the outside and control the access to the outdoors, and the less dominant ones tend to sort of disappear into the rafters of the building and form their own little sort of colonies.
Wow, really? That sounds like the sort of school playground kind of thing.
Everyone knows the pecking order and
true.
the idea of the pecking order, and it's a very real thing. And
so how do you manage that? How do you stop a bully on the gate?
We have lots of things for the hens to peck at and things for them to perch on, and we have sort of swings in their scratch area, which I think the more you can sort of give them plenty of distraction. It's like small children; they unless you sort of, if then they're sort of crying and in a tantrum, you need to distract them, and then they're fine.
So when I was chatting to Tom from Open Air Dairy, and we were chatting about that earlier, and he said that there's sort of a natural pecking order even with the cows, that they go through the milking parlour in their own sort of system. Is it the same? Do most of the birds come outside at some point, and do they tend to come outside in kind of groups or with their buddies, or
I mean, with 3,000 or 4,000 birds, it's obviously hard to say this one's been out and this one hasn't, but there's a couple of things that if it's a very wet day like this and it's been wet and you come in and you see that virtually all the birds are wet, you know that they've all come in as the rain came. The other thing that is maybe not sort of so well known is the comb. So the comb of the bird will be nice and red if it spends plenty of time outdoors. So it's like you or I having a suntan. So if you look around our hens, they've all got nice red combs because they generally spend a lot of time outdoors. But there will be the odd one with a pale comb, and it's rather like the analogy I think of is you get people who make the trip down to the New Forest and they've got 50 square miles of amazing woods and tracks, and yet they have their picnic in the lay-by and then go home. There's people who just, or even animals that are less adventurous by their very nature, and they don't sort of want to be as adventurous.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense that there'd be some special on a day like today where you'd just be cosy sat at the back. Will they, in weather like this, will they automatically just not go out? Are they like a cat where they just sort of look out and go sod that?
Some will go out, but they won't spend a lot of time outdoors when it's really stormy. But it's rare that you get a day when it just rains all day long, though it might seem like it with the weather we've had lately.
Okay. I guess the reason I'm asking this particular line is that I've never really understood, does a hen actually want to go outdoors? So this thing about this sort of hypothetical situation where we have a door at the end, it can go outside if it wants to. If they don't want to, not necessarily relevant. But if they do want to, then it feels like we should create the kind of environment where they can. I mean,
the proof that we see pretty much every day is when we open up what we call the pop holes to allow the hens to go outside, they'll come rushing out. It's sort of like opening a dam,
right?
Particularly if it's a beautiful sort of summer's morning when we'll tend to try and let them out sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they will all come piling out. And
right.
You only have to sort of witness that once to be completely reassured that free range is a better system.
Yeah,
you just sort of see that that animal sort of joy in going out into the sunlight, and then there'll be a fight over a worm, because they all know that when they first come out, that's when the best sort of pickings are out there, and
that makes sense.
And then you've also got, it's often a sort of gang of the real sort of hardcore ones that are going to just fly over the fence and disappear into the wood. The sort of what we call like the escape committee.
Really?
Yeah,
they do that. How often does that happen?
Yeah, most flocks we have what we call an escape committee of probably sort of a dozen birds that have sussed out how to get over the fence, and they just disappear.
Really?
And they are the sort of extreme sports people of the hen.
Wow, I've got so much more respect for hens now. There's the bullies, there's the escape artists, there's the recluse, there's the stay indoors, there's the sunbathe, there's the worm snappers.
And you see them. I mean, I saw this BBC thing a while ago, which was explaining how the hens are one of the few sort of living relatives of the T-Rex, and it just makes total sense that these are little sort of dinosaurs, really, that they just sort of want to get out there and sort of rampage sometimes.
Cause carnage.
If they were bigger than they are, I think we'd be running from them.
And am I right to be slightly sort of cynical that the kind of, we have this thing, we want to get rid of battery, and then all of a sudden there's this sort of hugely produced free range. Am I right in saying that it can be a box ticking exercise where you can say, right, there is a door at the end and they can theoretically get out, but in reality don't? Is that true? Or actually, if you see free range,
I think it is. I mean, not, I think it's a better system than just locking them up in cages, but it is what I would call that sort of large scale mass free range is like a sort of intensive free range or a factory free range. So whereas we're trying to sort of do an authentic sort of traditional free range, and I think you've got to sort of put it in perspective. In if you can buy half a dozen free range eggs now for a pound, then they're not going to be produced to the same level that a small scale farmer like we would do it.
Yeah. I feel for the consumer, because it makes it really challenging for them to know what's an acceptable purchase point, I suppose, and how do we get around that? Should there be another category, or because when you go to a supermarket, you don't sort of see average free range, good free range. You see sort of free range or not free range. Is it a case that you to really get this right, you'd have to go to your local deli or local farm shop or something?
Yeah, I mean the chap, I think we talked about the chap who started the traditional egg company that was an attempt to be a large-scale egg company that was just selling free-range eggs rather than the cage eggs and the barn eggs as well. and he was trying to create a new category whereby his slogan was "No multi-tier here," and the multi-tier is the big free-range unit where you've got your 16 to 30,000 birds in one house. And he got a lot of flack back from people in industry who felt that he was somehow sort of devaluing the whole brand of free range. And I think it's a difficult one, because a lot of farmers, they get free range hens, as we did 20 years ago, because the farm is struggling to find a profitable thing. They see a market that's growing, and you talk to a company that, in our case, was a company that was a franchise that set farmers up to produce eggs for supermarkets, and they say, yeah, this is a good way to add a lot of value to your land. You won't make a great deal of money selling the eggs. You will make a bit of money selling them at the farm gate to local people, but essentially you'll break even on the eggs, but you'll create a whole new sort of thing on your farm, which you can get planning permission for a house, and maybe now they also say you can get solar panels, and it's a new, and the other thing that's being promoted now, which wasn't the case then, was that these big units can produce lots of valuable manure, which, if you're an arable farmer and you're looking for an alternative to chemical fertilizers, then hen manure is a very valuable resource. And you can look at the economics and say, okay, I'm probably not going to get any profit at all for producing these eggs, but that manure is really valuable for my crops. So
wow. Yeah. Complicated, as these things always are. So you don't supply the supermarkets. You mainly supply, is it restaurants and bars direct?
Independent shops, locally, restaurants and hotels, cafes. Our biggest customer, single customer, is actually Hampshire County Council, the school eggs, the Hampshire school eggs. So really? That was a big game changer for us, beginning back in sort of 2008, when they had a sort of visionary sort of program to start using local free-range eggs, initially in sort of half a dozen schools in the Southampton area. And we were chosen through Hampshire Fair, being long-term. Well, prior to that, we were New Forest Mark members. New Forest Mark, it sort of brought us to the attention of Hampshire Fair. Hampshire Fair then brought us to the attention of Hampshire Catering Supplies, and they said, we want to try using free-range eggs rather than I think they might have had a mix of eggs before that, which came from sort of, I think the difference in food miles, they were saving 400 food miles using our eggs as opposed to the previous eggs they used that came from somewhere in the east of the country. Right. And the Hampshire school thing we still do to this day, and it's grown from a couple of dozen schools to about 350 schools across Hampshire, South Wiltshire, East Dorset and East Sussex, and then maybe into Berkshire as well. Wow. I think
that's amazing. You don't deliver those. We
work through their contract supplier, which is Bid Food.
Okay, yeah,
and that's just up the road from our packing station in Downton. So we deliver 2 or 3 times a week into there.
Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, things of your kind of niche and quality, I suppose, were available through some of the mass suppliers like Bid Food. I'd always imagined they were sort of only working with the bigger guys, but it's nice.
I mean, Bid Food allow they have an arrangement with Hampshire County Council supplies or catering supplies, whereby they can have a small group of local suppliers that they use, and we're one of those local suppliers that they use, and then obviously the rest they have to buy off list from the Bid Food list of available products.
Nice. Okay, we'll come back a little bit more to the business, but I want to carry on with the chickens a little bit more before we do. Yeah. What do they eat? And when you mentioned worms, so when they come outside, they can, in essence, are they foraging, or are you lobbing worms over the
they'll go for any sort of extra protein that they can get their beaks into.
Right, but that's just naturally there.
Yeah. And then they'll strip all the grass in the immediate vicinity of the house. So one of the reasons we have a system whereby we move our hen house between each flock so that we can then reseed the grass. And coming from a background prior to that where we had static hen houses where you would have a lot of trouble trying to regenerate the pasture around the house. So with our system, we can move the house up to the other end of the field and then reseed it, and the grass grows amazingly because it's had chickens on it, and it comes up. Like I think last summer we had to sort of top it 3 or 4 times. It was growing so well.
Do you get animals on to graze then, that grass, or you just keep it?
We just top it because we don't have any any other animals ourselves. We only sort of have a small area of land, and
that's where the system can get quite interesting, though, isn't it? Where it works, I think, isn't it? Is if you then have an animal that fundamentally should eat grass rather than grain, that all too often we're feeding grain. It feels like, that's where this, more variable farming is is fascinating.
We are actually looking at some ideas working with other farms locally that would pilot a sort of pasture cropping type of system with cows and chickens. And a chap I know who is a member of Pasture for Life, he has a herd of cows, and we're looking at ideas how we combine small numbers of chickens with his grazing plan so that the chickens can follow on behind the cows. And
Fluffetts Farm, have you heard
yes,
of
Joel, it's Salaton, isn't it?
So I've watched a little video on that, and that kind of symbiotic relationship between all the animals moving around the farm, and it helps grow the grass. The cows eat the grass, and the cows only eat it down to a certain level, so then there's another, I don't know if it's then the sheep that eat it down to the next level, and then put the chickens back in and they poo on it and it grows. You think it can be a fantastic system, and I think we're just learning, I guess, about some of the way that we used to farm, I guess, and the benefits of it. So when they're not foraging for the worms, because I can imagine they must surely, 13,000 birds. There can't be many worms left, I guess, after day 2. What do they eat?
Well, we have a very good feed supplier, which is Humphrey's Feeds, who are based in Winchester, and Martin Humphrey, who's, I think, he's definitely the second generation. He might be the sort of third generation of that family to run that mill. Is the sort of UK expert in hen diets, and he formulates sort of special diets for all the sort of premium sort of brands in the industry. And we've worked with Martin to produce a special diet for our hens where it's sort of 70% local wheat, and then we're adding in alfalfa and natural paprika and marigold to produce what we call a natural yolk.
Okay, it's not to make it more flavoursome, the food, are they?
I think the feedback from our customers is that our eggs are
I meant the hens.
The hens.
If they particularly were saying, can we have a little bit more?
It looks like the alfalfa it looks like this sort of like a dark sort of oregano in the feed, and the alfalfa is grown in France on the opposite side of the Rhine, where they grow the champagne grape on the south side of the valley. They grow the alfalfa on the north side, and it's this incredibly rich, sort of like a grass. But it's what the organic guys use for their diet, because they're not allowed to use any of the synthetic colorants, which is the industry standard to use what they call bioequivalent dyes.
Yeah.
So you have, when we first started in the industry going back 20 odd years ago, you were given a color chart from sort of bright orange through to sort of light yellow, and you would say where you wanted your yolk to be on the colour chart, and that's achieved by a bioequivalent to paprika and a bioequivalent to like a marigold.
Right.
But they're manufactured dyes that go into the feed to produce the egg yolk colour.
Okay.
And we sort of looked at how they do it in the organic world with the alfalfa and thought, well, we'll do it naturally using the alfalfa and also extract of paprika and marigold.
Okay.
The other element that goes in there is sunflower. So sunflower provides a protein level, some of the protein, and it's got lots of good oils in it and things as well. There is an element of soya in the diet. Soya's obviously some ways a sort of bit of a sort of bugbear for people, but
I think it depends where it's grown, isn't it? Do you know where that soy comes from, or is that?
Oh yeah, I think generally it comes from either the US or South America.
Right. Okay. That would be the next bit to get right then, I suppose, because I know in the soy milk product sometimes, but it's all European soya, which is nice now that I think we're trying to almost get to the point where you can get that provenance all the way through the supply chain, I suppose. But one to chat with the pellet makers. But then your eggs are not organic, is that right?
No, we're not organic, and that was, again, it was something we have looked at, and I think the differential on the feed is massive for free range. Ours is getting on for sort of £300 a ton, whereas the organic feed now is probably sort of 450. Some rations maybe closer to £500 a ton. So there's a big difference in the cost of the feed. And we don't produce the organic wheat in this country. Generally, the organic wheat comes from Ukraine is the typical origin, and the organic soya either comes from China or India. The preference, I think, these days is to get it from India, because there are questions about how organic Chinese soya is. But there's this. I don't think there's it's a difficult one, because for my mind, I'd rather have the diet be more. At least we know 70% of the diet of the hens is local, and I think that is important.
And you made the decision not to use the synthetic, the kind of additions, or you talked about the yolk colour, which is fascinating. So to use, what was it, sunflower seeds and marjoram, or whatever.
Alfalfa, marigold, marigold.
So you decided to go the natural kind of
and paprika is the red element, and marigold is the yellow gold element.
Okay. Well, and this is why I think people should always just work with their suppliers, because that makes much more sense to me than going organic for the sake of organic, if it means that your ingredients are coming from around the world. If you can use local wheat but still do the bits that make sense by not using the synthetic kind of colorants but use natural ingredients, I think that's why ideally you want to get as close to your kind of supplier for stuff as possible, I guess. Don't you? Makes a lot of sense.
We could probably, if we just went for a standard diet, we could probably save sort of £50 a ton, which would be thousands of pounds a year. But I think it's important to sort of to do it as naturally as we can, and the feedback from customers is that the eggs are very, very good as a result. So.
I've only ever heard great things. So we'll chat about that offline later as to for supply. So at night, all the hens do they automatically go back into the house? Do you have to go around with a big stick and encourage them? Do you let the foxes out? Or?
The majority, what we do is the hens have 4 feeds throughout the course of the day.
Right.
So the first feed is about half an hour after they wake up. So they have a sort of bit of a stretch.
They're still in bed at this point. They're inside.
Yeah, I mean, some hens, they tend to lay 80% of the eggs in the first sort of quarter or third of the day. So some hens will immediately go and lay an egg as they get up, and others will be, given an egg is produced every sort of 25 hours by a hen. So
one per day per hen?
Well, 25 hours. This means that a hen's going to have a day off every so often. If the cycle is 25 hours, and it's one of those things where, I mean, our hens will typically, when they're going well, produce at around about 90%. So 3,000 hens will produce about 3,000. So 4,000 hens would produce about 3,500 eggs a day. So some of them are going to have a day off, and the ones first thing in the morning, some of them, because they've probably just had a day off, they're then desperate to get in and lay an egg. The others will have a scratch round, and they all get really excited when the first feed goes round. You then have a few hours in the second feed, and these days we then have quite a big gap till the first feed in the afternoon. And the gap is to mimic what they've observed that birds do in the wild. So if you have a bird table and you've got the time to examine when the birds come to the bird table and when they eat the most, birds naturally more and later in the day. They like to eat early in the day, but they're not so interested in eating through the middle part of the day, and that's probably because that's where they're sort of being more active and less sort of they've already got something in their belly. But then it's really important to give them the final feed a good sort of hour or so before they go to bed. So we time our last feed of the day as the sort of, it's getting towards dusk. So that'll encourage them to come in to feed, and then they'll be nice and full. You want a nice full crop for when they roost. But there's, going back to the characters, there's always a few that are like two fingers to you, I'm not going in. So you can, particularly if it's a full moon and you go up there in the summer and it's a full moon and it's sort of 10:15 at night, there'll still be birds hanging around, sort of, as we say, having a cocktail party on the veranda, sort of, and you have to sort of sometimes just go in and actually physically go, come on, mate, you've got to go in now, because otherwise, if you're left out overnight, then that's when the fox can get you.
Right, okay. So literally daylight hours is what decides the timings of that then, presumably earlier in the winter, later in the summer, as to when they're let in and let out.
And at the moment, because the days are lengthening, we're moving their day forward, because in the winter we don't want to keep them up, on a dark evening. We want them to come in, have their sort of supper, and then wind down and settle down. So the lights in the winter will go on probably sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe 4:30 in the morning. We're sort of moving from 4 till it's closer to 5 now that they're getting up, and then the lights are getting longer at the end of the day. But the interesting thing is, if you go back to the 1960s, before this had really been worked out, the UK would produce very few eggs in the winter.
Right.
So our eggs would be imported in the winter from countries with a warmer climate and a longer day cycle. And of course, now we take it completely for granted that we have a steady supply of eggs all year round. And it's to do with the hens needing to have sort of 14 or 15 hours of light per day. Okay. When you're in midsummer, they're naturally getting 16 hours of light. And
so if they just followed normal hour kind of daylight hours, in essence, they wouldn't produce the egg. Why is that? It's not the light.
Well, they would naturally switch off when it gets to sort of 10 hours light or something. They would naturally want to switch off, and it's nature saying that it's winter. It's not going to be a good time to have a clutch of chicks or whatever. And
it's brilliant, isn't it? Love nature. It's so clever. And why do they lay one every day? In the wild, they wouldn't. They would lay a few, would they?
I think if you go back historically, you'd probably have hens that only laid an egg every other day, and you often hear
still a lot of babies, isn't it? Yeah. Why so? Are they just particularly motivated to continue their existence?
I think if you look at little sort of fluffy chicks, they're pretty vulnerable. So if you're a hen and you're going to sit on a dozen eggs and hatch them out, the chances of those making it to maturity are probably quite slim. So
how often in thinking, back in time, I suppose in the wild, they would, how long does it take to go from lay an egg to I've got a chick to I'm going to lay another egg? So
I think if you look at the best before date on hen eggs is 28 days. So I don't think the actual sort of formation of the chick starts till sort of 30 days plus.
Okay.
So what they're doing, but they're guarded by saying your best before date is 28 days from the date of lay. They're guarding against the fact that egg might have got fertilised, and the fact that you don't want to find there's a chick in it.
I guess what I find amazing is just that they have that ability naturally to produce an egg every day. I just find it seems like a bit overkill, really, isn't it? They would never really need that, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think what you call a hybrid hen has been selectively bred over years to produce at that time scale. But even a more traditional breed will still probably lay an egg every sort of 27 or 28 hours.
Wow.
But
I mean, I've got kids. They're hard work. I don't know why you'd want to be able to create a new one so quickly. It's beyond me. But handy though, isn't it? Because they make a lovely omelette or cake. So bless them for it. And talking around this size thing, am I right in saying then that this is very different for eggs than it is for? Is it broilers that we eat? Is that what the ones?
Yeah, broilers are the table bird.
The table bird, fine. And they're kept in smaller flocks. Is that right?
Broiler. There would be, a high-end free-range flock of broilers would maybe be done in a house of 1,000 birds in a sort of free-range system, but they would only be kept till sort of 70 or 80 days of age before they go to the table.
Yeah.
Whereas our birds are 16-week old when they arrive from the rearers, so they're already sort of double the age of a table bird. And the intensive broiler birds that are reared in massive sheds are reared in tens of thousands of numbers and would only be sort of 5 or 6 weeks old when they go to the table.
Yeah, so I guess that's the image I'm thinking about. Is kind of the big sheds, and I thought, yeah, there was thousands of those as well. But it's very different for a free range broiler. Then they tend to have smaller flock sizes, even than hen eggs. Like egg hens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it would depend on the farm. I mean, I think the reason that you keep them in smaller flocks is to produce a steady flow of product, because you want to, if you're producing a high-end free-range table bird, you don't want to have 4,000 one week and none the next week. So you would have sort of, say, 20 houses of 1,000, and then you can have a rotation whereby you've got 1,000 birds each week that are ready to go to the market.
I'm going to do a chicken episode one day, so let's stick to eggs so we don't get too far.
It's not my area of expertise.
I appreciate that.
I have been learning a bit about it lately, in conjunction with sort of learning about these regenerative ideas to do birds with beef, because it might be that it's a better system to have birds that go to table than birds to produce eggs, because if you've got laying hens out in the pasture with the cows, they might well lay their eggs all over the field, which
under a cow's not going to last long, is it?
Be wasted, because the eggs have to be sort of clean and well, laid in a nice sort of tidy place for them to be Class A gradable eggs.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So I'm nearly there around my questions of how they live. But you mentioned earlier, so inside, once they're inside at night, whatever, they basically they sit there. You say they lay their eggs in the morning predominantly?
The majority, 80% of the eggs would be laid in the first third of the day. And then, so if we do typically 2 egg collections a day by hand. If we're having sort of 3,500 eggs, we'd probably getting on for 3,000 eggs by sort of mid-morning. It takes a couple of hours to collect those all and put them on the trays. And then you'd maybe get another sort of 400 or 500 eggs in the afternoon, or by the end of the day. I mean, they would be laid not necessarily at 2:00, but between sort of 11 and 5. So
super productive. So the rest of the time inside the house, then, is there? I guess happy hens lay the best eggs within reason. So the other thing you mentioned, swings. What other things are in the design of a hen house that goes on?
We have pecking blocks, which they like to. That's like a sort of something for them to sort of peck on. We have like ropes dangling down, which again they like to sort of play with, and we've got some sort of tubular sort of swings that we put up when back in the sort of big bird flu crisis a couple of winters ago. We all had to legally lock our hens up. We weren't allowed to let them out from the ban came in the run up to Christmas, and then they weren't in the Avon Valley, which was deemed to be quite a high risk area because of all the wild swans, etc. I think we were allowed to let them out about mid-March. I mean, some areas of the country where they were deemed to be less risk were a few weeks before. They were sort of end of February, I think. But when they were all shut up, we tried to sort of enrich their environment, more to give them more entertainment, really.
Right. And the objective of that is, I know we talked about whether you can judge if a hen is happy or not, but basically, happy hen lays a better egg.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's animal welfare. I think it's difficult to don't want to sort of humanise an animal too much. It needs to be thought of in terms of more as being sort of able to exhibit natural behaviour and to not be sort of any way stressed or threatened or an emotion like happiness. I think you could argue the birds are very happy when the feed goes round and they're the first one there and they get the best bit.
Yeah, or that worm, that real worm.
Yeah, the worm. I think the worm is definitely a champagne moment for the hen, and they will fight over the worm.
you definitely think so. Yeah. And then we were chatting about this a little bit earlier when you showed me around the sort of packing house. So the other thing that has an impact on the on the egg is the age of the bird. So older birds lay bigger eggs. Is that right? And so what age do they arrive?
So our birds, which we call pullets, when they arrive at 16-week old, they're reared by Humphreys, our feed supplier, who last year won the Pullet Rearer of the Year awards, so the sort of Oscars of chicken rearing.
Wow, were you there?
I wasn't there.
Missed out.
But it's nice to know that your pullets are reared by the very best possible people, and obviously we know that they're getting the best feed in rear as well as once they get to the farm. And they arrive in 16-week old. We've usually had about 3 weeks to clean the house, make any repairs to and disinfect it and get it all shipshape for the new birds. And then when they first arrive, their combs aren't developed. So going back to the red combs, you wouldn't be able to tell if they had a red comb because the comb is only just starting to sort of develop on the bird. And that's the sort of classic pullet. They're probably still about 20% off their mature weight. So we concentrate on giving them a sort of really calm, spending time with them to get them familiar with the house, making them calm, and encouraging them to eat well, which you do by stimulating the feed. So we turn the feed on at extra times during the day to get them used to the feeding system and encourage them to eat. And we're aiming all the time to get them to the best possible weight so that when they start laying the eggs, they're physically capable of sustaining those 300 eggs that they will produce over their sort of commercial lifetime. If you have a flock that comes into lay before they're physically mature or physically able to do, then that's when you get lots of stress problems and issues later down the track, because the bigger, physically stronger birds will naturally form a sort of gang against the weaker, sort of less physically strong birds. So we're always looking at what's the average weight of the pullet and what's the evenness. And we aim for sort of 90% evenness. So they're very uniform and they've all got a good weight. And the way we stop them from actually laying the egg too soon is by controlling the light. And obviously when you have birds in like we did last May, that's a big challenge, because outdoors is 16 hours of light and nature's burrowing away and telling them lay sort of thing.
So what, have you got blackout blinds and stuff?
We have curtains, but they still know. And you know, with the birds last spring, they came in at a really good weight. We did get the weight on quickly, and then we just thought, right, we just got to let them go for it, because when you have your curtains up, you restrict the airflow into the house. And the air quality in the house is really important. Yeah. So, yeah, we just let them sort of get on with it, and they've done really, really well.
Just literally by opening the curtains and saying,
opening the curtains, and
nature takes its course.
Let the sort of light and the fresh air in, and
yeah. Okay, interesting. I'm going to dive off of chickens a little bit before some people go, "Oh my god, this is super detailed," because this wasn't.
I could waste the whole afternoon
to give you a rest as well. Although we're going to come back to it if I've got some other questions. But how long have you been doing this? Because you had a very different career before. Because it sounds like you were almost born in a hen shed. But can you talk a little bit about
Well, when we had the farm when I was a child, had about sort of 50 hens in a little barn, and that was sort of just to produce a few eggs for the family. And in those days, the farm had about a dozen people working on it.
So how did you end up in London selling kites then? How did that happen?
Oh yeah, the kites. Well, university in London, doing a business course. Started, I had a bicycle, which is how I got around in London. I used to ride past this shop that had these amazing things in the window, and I sort of stopped one day, and they were selling a combination of juggling balls and kites, and they had a little TV in this shop, and on the TV was a chap on a beach in Cornwall doing a 100-foot leap latched onto a kite. I thought, this looks pretty good fun. And there were these things called flexifoils, which it turned out a couple of mates of mine had seen this as well, so we all bought these flexifoil kites, and we used to go down at the weekend to hilltops in Dorset in the New Forest and sort of leap across these things with these kites, and it it was quite sort of physically damaging, and it wasn't particularly well. One of my mates, who's a chef these days in London, he actually landed on his head and sort of.
Wow.
I don't know if he's ever been quite the same since.
But he's a chef. Just kidding, chefs. Yeah. Just kidding.
He's a very good chef, but I think it slightly put him.
If you're a bit crazy,
it slightly put him off the kites, and I sort of thought I've got to do something more productive with this, and started got into the kite buggying, and to afford that as a student, I had to work in the shop. So I got the job in the shop. Ended up dropping out of being a student and running 3 shops for this chap and selling all these kites and rollerblades and juggling balls and skateboards and stuff, and then thought I could actually do this myself. And two friends and I got together and raised a little bit of money and opened this mad shop on Portobello Road, which was called the London Beach Store. And we opened that in '97, which was just when they were doing the Notting Hill film. So we our sort of signage was actually in the film. We got compensated for having to shut our doors while they filmed. And
how long did you have to shut for?
Oh, I think a couple of afternoons or something. And
I bet they were busy days, weren't they, as far as the sales figures showed? Or we would have sold a lot of kites that day.
I mean, once the word got out that there was this compensation going from this film company, you've never seen so many stall holders on Portobello Road. Yeah, People had their sort of grandfather out with a table with 2 oranges on it.
Yeah, rainy Tuesday. That's always the busiest day of the week. Oh, yeah. 1,500 kites we'd have sold.
Yeah, but I mean, there was a connection to the food industry even back in those days, because one of my partners, his mother was Rose Gray, who ran the River Cafe, and that was when I think Jamie was working there, Oliver, and I think Hugh Fernley was also there, and there was some. We used to go and have our business meetings at the River Cafe, thanks to Rosie and Ruth.
Amazing.
Yeah, and they all sort of put a little bit of investment in, and everyone said we were completely mad, we were going to fail, but we actually made a profit in our first year, and for quite a long while didn't look back. And we were selling all these amazing kites, which we were the first shop in London to sell kite surf equipment, and used to sort of sell these things with just sort of 2 lines and a disclaimer of like 50 pages saying don't use this because you're going to die, basically.
Nice.
And it did all get safer, but at the same time the internet came along, and we eventually became the sort of expensive showroom for these online shops. And
yeah, that's frustrating. How long did you do it for?
Oh, that was 10 years.
10 years.
Our rent went up by sort of 4 or 5 times, and we had, after about 7 or 8 years, we had to move off the sort of main strip and into a side street, and that was still sort of 65,000 a year plus the rates. So you're talking 100,000 a year before you've sold a kite and paid anybody.
Yeah, that's a lot of kites. Okay, so what year did you come out of London?
Beginning of 2008.
Right. So and what was the motivation then?
Having sort of got married in 2007, and thought, we're going to be in a bit of stuck here. We've lost our business and we've got to sort of relocate, and thought we'll come back down to the New Forest. And
was your wife from the New Forest as well? Or?
No, she's from Lincolnshire, and half Mauritian. So
not the city centre though, because it'd be hard to lure people out of London sometimes. It'd be lovely. Let's go and live in the country. But at least you didn't have that challenge.
But I mean, I had the New Forest connection, and the initial plan was to do teach kite surfing down here. I had a friend who still runs the best kite surf school in the country at Portland.
Okay.
Para Academy, a chap called Spencer down there, and he got me onto one of their instructor courses, and we were going to do these kite lessons and organise kite surfing holidays to Mauritius. And of course, 2008 financial crisis. The bigger world had slightly different plans, but what was going very well was the egg sign, and they needed some help with that. And
so this is through your family?
Yeah.
Okay. So so what was it? This is, you were brought up on a farm as a kid, were you? Or?
It is a sort of very complicated family story which we again could spend a lot of time on, but essentially it was my stepfather who had the farm. It was sort of, when I was there in the 70s, it was about 500 acres, and dairy in the 70s, arable in the 80s, fruit growing in the 90s, and then it all had been gradually sold off over this time, and the last 40 acres was, let's try the free range thing, and free range is growing. And when they and I moved down from London, the contract had just begun with the Hampshire schools for the eggs, and Mum couldn't cope with the need to write out in spreadsheets and invoices, and of course I'd been doing that, and also, I was able to help with all the deliveries, and so got sucked into egg world, which was not really the plan.
I was going to say that's quite a contrast to kite surfing school in Mauritius.
Yeah,
So,
the line I came up with at the time, I went to my first sort of pig and poultry fair and talking to people, and they said, "What have you been doing?" "Well, kite surfing." "Oh yeah, and what's the connection to chickens then?" And I said, "Well, one's flightless birds, and the other one's birdless flight." Which
yes, a loose link.
Loose link.
Yeah, it was meant to be. So so you came into the business then to help develop it.
Yeah, and it was sort of just the 4,000 hens then, and the contract, as I say, for Hampshire schools was a couple of months old, and Mum was very frustrated that she wasn't getting paid for the eggs, but Bid Food 3663 weren't getting proper invoices, and I sort of helped on that.
Much as that may have been, I can see the challenge of thinking, hot beach in Mauritius or else. It seems now that you're an exceptionally happy, hen farmer. Any regrets, or are you glad you got involved?
Oh yeah, I'm very, very glad to have got involved. I mean, when you grow up for 5 years we lived on the farm when I was a child, and I had a sort of free range childhood, really just going off with the dog, and it's a miracle I wasn't sort of killed several times falling off silage clamps, and nearly lost a hand running a string on the back of a trailer on the back of a tractor, and all these sort of things. But this is the sort of peril of being free range. You come up against danger, don't you? But that sort of experience always made me sort of connected to farming. And then we moved to the New Forest from where we just sort of go out on the forest all day and sort of build a little campfire and cook sausages with a friend, and try and catch a fish in a forest stream and stuff. So
nice. So nice now to be able to recreate that presumably a bit for your kids compared to on Portobello Road. They're now in the New Forest and can. I
think I've got good friends with kids in London, and there are lots of advantages in terms of museums and everything's kind of there. But at the same time, I think the country has so much to offer kids, and
I agree. I lived in London for 10 years and I loved it, and I certainly miss the buzz of restaurants and bars being busy every night of the week in London, because down in Bournemouth it's it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday kind of trade really, which can be a little bit depressing, and then it's also seasonal with the winter and the summer. But I love London. However, it is nice to live 60 seconds from the ocean. So congratulations on the career change for you. And that sort of leads into one of the other topics that I wanted to talk about is what happens to the hens in sort of retirement. So where do they go? Well,
the lucky few, I guess, go to people who've said to us in the run-up that we need a few hens for the garden. The foxes had our hens. When are your hens going? There's always some that get sort of rehomed, but the practicalities of rehoming sort of 3,000 or 4,000 chickens in an afternoon are not particularly easy. So they go to a processor who is involved in taking hens from lots of farms, and in the majority, they say in the majority of the case of the free range hens, where in the past, when we first started, they used to go into the sort of pet foods and that sort of thing, but now they have a market for them into the curry trade and sort of that type of product. But we did a pilot last year with some chefs in London where we were getting some of the spent hens to some of the restaurants, and the chefs were doing these amazing kind of slow cooked dishes and really bringing out the flavour of the meat. and I think it's got a lot of potential if
Yeah.
you've got the right chef who you can get the hen to in the right way. And I mean, one of the chaps says to me, there's more energy involved in slow cooking this, but relative to the other hens I'm buying and the flavour that we're getting from this meat, as long as it's cooked well enough to get tender, it's a really good product.
Yeah, so we looked at this a little bit with cows in the restaurants and using dairy cows, so older cows. There's an issue with BSE and the timing. So I think is it 4 years maybe or 3.5 years, something like that.
Where 36 months.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then you're not supposed to be able to put them into the food chain. But actually, the dairy cows were older and were full of flavour and cooked in the right way. Were really good. But I'd never really thought about the same thing in hens until I was, doing some research a couple of days ago. So I like the idea of that. So if you just cook them in the traditional way, presumably too tough, not tender enough.
Well,
But
if you go back to the sort of 50s, 60s, prior to the the current sort of legislation on slaughter and so on, the hen producer would sell the hens towards the end of the flock. They would take hens out and sell them to the local butcher, who would boil them and sell them as boilers. And so the meat was already sort of tenderized by the butcher, and people in the culture then knew how to treat that meat. But that has been slightly knocked on the head by the fact I can't just sell my chicken to the local butcher. Why
don't they sell those anymore?
Well, this is it. This is something that could be revitalised. And I know in Gloucestershire there's a farm, I think it's called Fluffetts Farm, who are working on a sort of mobile abattoir project. And apparently one of these mobile abattoirs could process 200 hens in a day. So there may be an opportunity going forward where if we could have one of these mobile abattoirs in Hampshire, Dorset, that worked with farms here, and it's a big problem for farmers to get animals to, say, Sherborne or Bridport, where the nearest abattoirs are. And I think you talked to Jody Schechter, who a lot of people I knew used to use his abattoir, but that's...
Yeah, he closed it. Yeah, which I was surprised by, because I've spoken to a few people who say that the abattoir is the problem. But he said he couldn't make it viable.
A mobile abattoir could do all sorts of animals for different farmers, but it could also potentially process 200 chickens for someone like ourselves, so that towards the end of a flock, maybe you could do several batches of hens that would be much more... Because I can't deliver 1,000 chickens to one restaurant, whereas 50 chickens could go to 4 restaurants quite easily. So
it seems crazy that it might be a bit like the goats when I interviewed them. You find out how many billy goats are being sort of shot at birth. It seems bonkers that there's these hundreds of thousands, I guess, of hens going to waste. When
but they're not. The thing is, they're not going to waste as such now. They are going into the food chain.
Yeah.
But the big thing is, I mean, when we first started, you had to pay to have the hens taken away. So when it was just going into pet food, you as the farmer had to pay to have your hens taken away. So it was maybe 25p a bird. If you had 8,000 birds, that was sort of £2,000 just to have your hens taken away at the end of the flock. Nowadays, at some points when the market's been good, we've actually got getting on for 50 pence a bird, but in the last couple of years that's dropped down to about 20p a bird. And if you're under a contract where all your eggs are sold for you, etc., the typical figure in the free range budget is 5p a bird. So the farmer who has those 16,000 or 30,000 hens that he's initially bought for £4, £5 a bird is getting a very small return, which, even if we could change that from 5p to 40p, would make a huge difference to his turnaround cost. Because the point when people go bust in free range is that point where they've had a flock out maybe that hasn't done particularly well, and then before they see any income, they've got to pay for the next flock of hens and wait 6 to 8 weeks before any commercial eggs are produced. So cash flow wise, so anything that you could add in terms of value at the end of the flock, and find restaurants and chefs that could put more value on that product would be.
No, I think it sounds fascinating actually. Yeah, so I'll speak to my chefs and maybe we can have a little play. I guess the abattoir is the problem really at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the company, the company that take our hens, I know they are supplying hens to some restaurants in London through Food Chain. Do you know Food Chain, the buying sort of app?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it'd just be interesting to try it. A bit like mutton, I suppose, isn't it? It's just a more mature kind of meat and see the difference. But chefs love having a little tinker and a little play and seeing if it works better in certain dishes and why and all that kind of stuff. So, okay, something that I will definitely look into. And the reason that other people would, in essence, adopt them is you don't want them because they're presumably not laying an egg a day by this point. Is that the reason? But they're still laying a few a week.
They still lay, but the lay will often have declined to sort of below 80%,
right?
Which would be fine. But what happens is because the eggs get so much bigger, an egg. The shell of an egg is typically the same weight, whether it's a tiny pullet egg or an extra large egg. So you've got the same amount of shell, it's just spread thinner. So as your average egg weight goes up from sort of 40 grams, 50 grams, 60 grams, and towards the end of the flock, the egg weight could be 65, 70 grams, that shell is spread very thinly. And the shell becomes a lot more breakable. So the eggs that are getting broken in the process can go as high as 15, 20% in the last few weeks of lay. And for someone like ourselves that does all our grading, handling, we do it all ourselves, we can save the maximum amount of eggs. But if you're producing eggs under contract that go to a third party to pack them, as soon as they get seconds of 10 to 15%, they will say, we unless you can pull out all those eggs at the farm, we're not going to take any more, because they need to put a pallet of eggs through their machine, so 750 dozen eggs through their machine in 5 minutes flat. And if 10% of those eggs are breaking, you can imagine the mess of 750 dozen eggs going through a machine in 5 minutes and 10% or more are breaking. That's a huge amount of liquid egg and time lost, and
makes perfect sense. And I had absolutely no idea that the egg always weighed the same, or the shell always weighed the same, and it just got thinner. That makes sense. And that machine you were showing me earlier, which was this phenomenal, what was it called, the one with like lots of little sucky caps?
That's a MOBA 2000.
MOBA 2000.
Which reminds me of 2000 AD, the comic or something.
I will put a photo on the website for people, so you should have a look at that. But how does that that was in essence to grade the eggs. So I now that you're
that was a sort of state of the art machine in the 70s, I suppose.
Yeah, it's got lots of chains and cogs and all that kind of stuff, and it picks up every egg and weighs it. As you were talking, I was thinking, you really wouldn't want hundreds of broken eggs going through that, because it looked like it was fairly mechanical, I suppose, or even if it was computerized, you don't want eggs all over your stuff. So do they break in that process, or do they get caught before that?
Well, we've got sort of three levels. We because we're hand collecting the eggs at the farm, we can take out maybe sort of 0.5% or 2%, 3% there, depending on the age of the hens. And then when we're actually grading and packing, we've got 3 points in the process there where we can also take out weak shells and bad eggs.
Right.
So we don't break too many, but we had old hens that were finishing up over Christmas, and we needed to keep them till Christmas time because of the demand for big eggs at Christmas. So they were producing, the eggs that got through were lovely big eggs, but it was taking us probably 3 times as long to grade those eggs because of the extra time and care it took to make sure that what came out and went into the trays and the packs to the customers wasn't going to break. And that's the big difference. And that's why a big company that just wants to put a whole pallet of eggs through a machine that can do a pallet in 5 minutes, which takes us half an hour to an hour to do that same amount of eggs, even if we're going at full rate, that means for us that when the eggs are old, it's going to take us three hours to do what should take us an hour. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, so, it all makes perfect sense. Okay, and then going back to the sales side, so you mentioned schools. We know you do bars and restaurants, but you've also and some of the local deli shops. You've also opened your own shop now. Is that right? How long ago was that, and why? Yeah. What made you decide to get into the retail space direct?
There was a number of reasons why we did the shop. It's called Fluffetts Home, which It's honey, oil, milk, and eggs. So yeah, that's I called it an anagram, but I was corrected. It's an acronym. But that's why you have people proof your PR material.
Yeah, very true.
But, yeah, the shop was partly the fact that our regular market, farmers market in Salisbury, was very popular, and we do that twice a week, Tuesday and Saturday at the Salisbury Charter Market. We've done that for about 5 years now, I think it is, 4 or 5 years. We took that stall on from a long-standing customer of ours who sold eggs there for 10 years previously, and so we already had an established market there, but we combined that with selling local honey and meringues and local preserves and that sort of thing. We thought, well, if we can do this twice a week in Salisbury, why shouldn't we do it in a local town where we don't have any customers already, and we can start selling exciting things like local cheese and local milk, and being members of New Forest Mark, Hampshire Fair, Dorset Food and Drink, we've met all these other wonderful producers through that, and it's just like, wow, we could sell our eggs and some of their stuff too, and it's all going to be local. You look at people like the pig and how much the local story resonates with people, and we just thought we'll take a gamble. It's going to be a failure if it's a failure, and we've only signed for 3 years. It's in a side street. Rent compared to £65,000 in London is £8,000 a year. The rates, it's below the rate radar because it's too small. It's only 450 square foot, and if it all goes wrong, we'll call it our office.
Okay. Yeah. When did you open it?
Just before Easter 2 years ago.
Okay, great. How's it going?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, this year Christmas was 30% up. Huge credit to Bay, my wife, who makes the most amazing sort of hampers and gift boxes, and it's a really popular little local food shop.
Yeah.
All idea built on local stuff within sort of 30 miles, and
yeah, love it. I'm going to go and check it out. I've seen you putting some posts on Instagram, and we'll come to your social handles in a minute, but I always think, oh wow, you've got some amazing stuff there, which is really good. So so where are you going to go from here then? How do you see the future panning out for Fluffetts? What's next?
Well, I mean, the challenge this year is to produce more eggs. We've in the past we've been having the problem of having too many eggs at times, but we're trying to make sure now that doesn't happen, but at the same time to keep up with demand, and we've got more hens arriving next week, and then we've got an empty house that more hens can go into at some point there again, and then hopefully we've got a hen house on another farm that we're going to rent in sort of May this year, that would give us a bit more flexibility, would give us 3 sites to have the hens, and
yes, I guess it's quite challenging in the fact there's a lead in, isn't there? It's not you can't flex your supply if demand flexes on a week by week basis, or a really big contract comes.
You're looking at 20 weeks lead time just to order the hens,
right,
and get them onto the farm, and then another 4 or 5 weeks before they lay an egg. So effectively,
half a year.
It's at least sort of 6 months, and
that's complicated, isn't it?
So
it's not like you can be out knocking on doors going, right, I've got a great big contract, great, we supply it. You've got to grow it gradually, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like those people that rang up this morning and wanted sort of 850 boxes of 15 dozen. It's sort of, well, for a start, the price is completely wrong, but you couldn't just sort of produce those out of thin air. But nowadays, I mean, we only deal with one really good local wholesaler, which is Country Fair.
Yeah, I know them.
And then Bid Food, who do the Hampshire Schools eggs, and then everything else we're selling direct through our own vans, and sending up to London using APC to send the eggs to restaurants in London. Okay. So we I guess 5 years ago, we were thinking we've got to have 3 or 4 wholesalers, and that's the way to grow it. And we had 3 or 4 wholesalers, and they don't pay you on time, and they want, as the market for eggs drops in price, they want you to drop your price, and you've already agreed on a price that is just about workable, but you take 10p a dozen off that, and suddenly your potential profit has disappeared into a loss.
Yeah, food and drink in general, tight margin game. I think, was there some stuff you learned from running? Because it made me laugh when I saw that you, in essence, that you ran a kite surfing shop in London. I was like, what? But B, the fact that you were then in eggs. I think
the juggling element of because we sold juggling balls as well. I think there was there's a tie in there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you don't want to be dropping the eggs.
Yeah.
But were there some transferable skills? Were there things that you think actually it was really useful that I did go off and have that journey and that adventure because you could bring it back into the world of eggs?
Yeah, I think just dealing with people and customers and presentation and but I mean the lovely thing with the eggs is you see you're producing the product rather than selling something that someone else has produced. Even if you're absolutely in love with this kite, someone else has built it in Hawaii, and you can never claim that. Whereas having something like an egg that your hens have produced, and then having a relationship with the people that are buying that, where you see them every couple, twice a week, or if you don't see them, you speak to them on the phone twice a week, and in that case, it's rare that people say, "Gosh, those eggs that you delivered last week were amazing. I had the best weekend with those eggs ever," like they did with the kite.
Yeah,
but
true.
We did have a letter from one of our cafes in January just saying, "Guys, the service at Christmas was fantastic. The eggs, we just love them, and please keep doing what you do." And you don't always hear that, but you kind of know that if you weren't there, people would really miss you, kind of thing.
That's nice. Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question. You've probably kind of answered it, but I guess it's when you wake up in the morning, what makes it a good day? What's the greatest buzz? What's the kind of like, yay, today's going to be awesome? I guess it's the bit of the job that gives you the most reward.
Yeah, I do really still quite enjoy packing the eggs.
Really? Putting on a podcast.
Starting with sort of I can't, I listen to the podcast when I'm doing the deliveries in the van and driving about the place. But just, working with a team of people, you start with in the morning with 4 or 5 pallets of eggs that have come from the hen house, and just turning that all into something that can go into a shop and be sold the next day by a retailer or used in a busy kitchen. That's a sort of lovely thing. You're twice a week you're creating a whole batch of your own product and delivering it to hopefully happy customers.
Yeah.
But I also really enjoy my morning when I do the hens and just spend time with them, checking that everything's working, because having a fresh set of eyes at the hen house, you see something maybe the other chap wouldn't have seen, and I do all the adjustments on the feed clocks and checking temperatures and there's just that bit when you actually let them out in the morning and that they all go and you think, that's what it's about.
Yeah, nice. Okay, well, look, I need to come and join you one morning and and see that.
I'm sorry we couldn't go there.
No, but I'm going to come back. You're not too far away. So people can go to Wimborne and they can buy them. They can go to their local, either restaurants or farm shops. You're also pretty active on social media though. So where should people go to follow your journey and see what you're up to?
Yeah, well, I think we were probably the first sort of chicken farm in the country to have a Facebook page, and I can't say I do an awful lot with Facebook. We put the odd sort of video on there, and then we were quite early on with the Twitter thing as well. Those are both at Fluffetts, I think, and then Instagram more recently, which is at Fluffetts as well, I think.
Okay. Is that where you're more active on Instagram? It's probably where I see you, but are they all pretty much the same?
Instagram's a really nice sort of medium for showing off pictures of birds and showing what you saw when you're out delivering the eggs and you stopped to walk the dogs or that kind of
thing. Look, you have fulfilled my egg and hen geekiness that's been sort of bubbling away inside me for ages. I now think I get it, which is brilliant. So thank you so much for sparing the time.
I could probably sort of go on for a long time.
Yeah,
more,
you could, but people would be booing at their radios. So good luck. We'll keep in touch, and I will put links to your website and to your social on the website as well, humansofhospitality.co.uk.
Thank you so much, Mark.
But thank you so much. It's much appreciated, Ben. Cheers.
Very good.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast, and remember that on the website humansofhospitality.co.uk, every week we put on some show notes and some links through to the various websites or social media that are mentioned, and we also do a nice little breakdown of that week's conversations into specific topics, so you can jump through the podcast and just listen to some of the highlights if you wish. If you've not done so already, if you could leave us a review on iTunes or one of the other podcast players of your choice, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much, and we'll be out with another episode next Monday.